Hello and welcome. I am the Restless Kaiser and we are modelling for advantage. Well, actually, again, we're not modelling. Today we're going to have a look at another tabletop ready painting guide. The videos that I'm doing on painting, they're not competition winning painting, they're basic painting, and today we're going to have a look at skeletons. I'm getting ready for Warcry and I'm going to use the Legions of Nagash warband, so I thought I'd get my skeletons out. Now I have to say though, the skeletons that I'm painting are not actually Games Workshop skeletons, they're Mantic skeletons, but skeletons are skeletons, right? So I'm going to take you through the basic steps that I went through, step by step, each paint used with a still, so you can have a good look at it and see how it works. If you've never painted a miniature before in your life, get yourself a cheap box of skeletons, maybe from Games Workshop or Mantic, just they do some for like £5 or £6. Spray the thing black and have a go at this. You're going to learn how to dry brush, you're going to learn how to apply washes, and you're going to be fairly happy with the result no matter how bad a painter you are. Skeletons is a fantastic way to learn the technique, and probably everybody's got some. So you can see here, this is the end product that we're going for. You can see that they've got a very basic arrangement of colours, but they're going to be quite distinctive on the battlefield, and they're going to look good en masse. You need to not look at these guys as an individual figure and think to yourself, do you know what? These are sweet, I'm going to paint like a pro. You need to look at these and think, what does 100 of these look like as a blob? We're going to do all of our work with two brushes. In particular, I've used Citadel's dry brush and Citadel's small base brush. You don't need to use those particular brushes, but you do need one brush for smaller detail work and one dry brush. Probably your biggest limitation in the speed of producing these, and you really can batch paint this way, is the time it takes for your dry brush to sort of dry out between coats. There's going to be quite a bit of dry brushing, and indeed in many ways you could just dry brush the whole thing and leave it at that. So let's look at the first stage. I strongly recommend when you're painting your figures to think about mounting them in some way. The more you handle that model with your fingers, the more grease you're putting on it and the more paint you're rubbing off it. As you can see from the still here, I've just blue tacked them to the lids of tester pots from Wilco or somewhere like that. The reason I do that, the tester pots are just used for painting scenery and things like that. It's a great way, they're acrylic paints so they match. But the bottom line is, I don't need to touch this model. If you're painting your models and you find that the hair or the feet, constantly when you finish, the paint's rubbed off, that is because you are handling the model. As long as you've got these things mounted on a pot or something, you can turn it upside down and you can keep a good firm grip on it when you're painting those small details. So to get our skeletal bone colour, we're going to use a lot of dry brushing. We're going to dry brush up various layers, gradually moving towards a more bone colour, but we're giving it such a heavy dry brush that we need to not just go straight to the bone. We need to get rid of some of the darkness from the black primer that we've used. Just used a cheap £1 rattle can from the pound shop, which I'm a great fan of when you're looking at match painting because you can get through a lot of cans of spray. So we start with a Mechanicus standard grey. We dry brush it very heavily. This is going to do two things for us. This is going to put the first steps of kind of toning down a lot of that black that's everywhere, but leaving some of it behind. But it's also going to bring out all the detail in the model. A lot of painters would tell you, in any model you're painting, if you're going to undercoat black, maybe dry brush the whole thing with a bit of grey or something before you start, because it's going to show you the different areas in much more detail. A problem with black, it soaks up all the light and it can be quite difficult to see what you're doing. So the next step, we start lightening the grey. So we've used the Mechanicus standard grey on the first step, and on the second step we're moving to a Celestra Grey, which is a much lighter grey. We're giving it again a very heavy dry brush, maybe not as heavy as before, but close. And you may be going to hit slightly different areas with this, but really try and cover everything on the model. I took the stills up here where there's more light in the hope that you'll be able to see more clearly the differences. But these first few steps, the differences are not going to look that great on the stills, but believe me, you're going to see it on the model. So we've done our two greys, we're now going to put the bone colour on. So the bone colour then that we're going to put on now, I use the Ushabti Bone. You could use more steps for this, but because I've used those greys beforehand, and those greys are going to help with all of the colours on this model, not just the bone colour. But again, we go back to quite a heavy dry brushing of this with the Ushabti Bone. This is going to give the bone colour, or the bulk of the bone colour, to all the skeletal parts. There's a lot of armour on this skeleton, but again, don't worry too much about getting this Ushabti Bone on the other areas. It doesn't matter, we're going to paint over them. Also, Ushabti Bone is quite a good kind of highlight color for a light dry brush, and it's going to provide a little layer of underpainting for the colors you're going to put on later. So just don't worry about it. Just whop that dry brush all over the place and try and get this thing looking a lot more yellowish rather than just grey. So we move over to that much smaller brush. Whichever detail brush you're using, frankly, you can use brushes from the works, or again, you know, as long as it can keep a tip. As you can see in the photograph that we've got here, the important thing about any brush that you're going to paint any detail on it really is the tip. Beginners will often feel that a smaller brush is going to be what they want. They're going to be able to do more precise detail. The problem is the smaller the brush you get, the less paint it holds, and the quicker that the paint dries out. So it's quite important to use the biggest brush you can get away with. For me, I find the Citadel small base brush is about the right kind of size, but it's by no means the only way you could do this. Then we start moving on to the metallic parts. There's going to be a lot of metal parts on most of these models, remnants of armor, full shields, whatever. At this point, I haven't decided how I'm going to paint the shields. These particular models that we're looking at here are the more elite versions of the skeletons. You can see they've got plumed helmets, and I'm thinking that I might do the shields with a specific design or different from those brownish ones that you saw in the intro sequence. Either way, apart from the shield then, because I haven't decided, is I've got the lead belcher out, and all of the metallic areas got some coverage on there. So those areas are the helmet, any remnants of armor, and the weapon. It's not showing up too well on here, I admit, because again, all of these colours have been quite similar, but you're going to see it later, because we're moving now onto the steps where you're going to really add some colour to the model. So the first of the details that we're putting in is all the cloth and fabric areas. These again are supposed to look, as I mentioned before, these are my Graveguard type troops, my more elite troops. So I've gone for a red. In particular here I'm using Khorne Red from Citadel. I'm using quite a dark, almost burgundy red here as a base layer, and it's going to make them look quite distinctive from the other skeletons on the table, even in cases where you might be using the same model, using a much more attractive colour and a much more vivid colour than the manky brown that I've used on the previous batch of skeletons that you've seen there. Our models are really starting to take shape now. To be honest, for a lot of us, we could just finish right there. I'm going to go a few steps further just to show you the little bit of difference, but they're absolutely, you could put a wash on those models and take them, and they're good to go. I want to add a little bit more detail, but not too much. So I'm going to paint the leather parts on the model, which is going to be the gloves. Some of them have got the odd boot. Maybe they've got a belt or a sword in the scabbard. And I'm using Rhinox Hide. I'm using Rhinox Hide because it's a very dark colour, and it's going to contrast quite strongly with the colour of the robes, but not draw too much attention. The danger with using some of the lighter browns is they're going to pop on this otherwise quite dull model. So by this stage I've decided what I want to do with the shields and how I'm going to mark them out. And this is again part of the process of painting. I think it's always, a lot of us can get stuck behind the not being sure what to do, so we don't do anything. I would strongly encourage you not only to have several projects simultaneously on your workbench so you can flip between them depending on your mood or your interests, but do the bits that you're comfortable, that you know what you're going to do. If you can't decide exactly how you're going to paint a model, that's fine. You can do that later. You can do the bits that you can do, and in the background your brain is churning away, and 3 days later you'll come back to this and think, I'm going to paint those shields gold. This is exactly what I did. I wasn't sure up until this point, and when I got to this point where I was putting some detail over the metal areas and I was going to use the gold, I decided that that's how I wanted the shields to look. I wanted the shields to really stand out compared to my other troops and really cement that idea that this is an elite unit. I also painted the hilts of the weapons and a few other items here. I did paint, there's a kind of a trim around the helmet, which you've probably seen. I did paint that gold also. And if you're a beginner at this, you may find that quite difficult. I would suggest that you try and use the side of the brush against the edge as much as possible. If you imagine this is the rim, this is the finger, you're going to paint the brush along like this if that's the head of the brush. Okay, that probably looks a little bit weird. But to be honest, you didn't need to do that. You don't need to do that if you're not confident. Have a go. If it doesn't work out for you, tidy it up with a bit of lead belcher and forget about it. Getting close to the end now, a few more steps. One of the tricks that I learned quite a long time ago in relation to metal armor, especially if you're dealing with fantasy models, it can work quite well, is this big kind of slab of iron work can be very dull to look at and can be very dull to paint. So what you want to do is you want to take another colour, another metallic colour, a copper or a bronze, and just paint up the odd plate here or there. It works particularly well on things like skeletons because it looks like, you know, different bits. Not only are they made of different materials, but maybe they were put on there at different times, and maybe quite radically different times. So I've used the Balthazar gold here, and I've put several panels here and there just to break up the wall of the metal. But because the metal colours are not that distinct from the bone colours at a distance, it also helps draw attention to the fact that these areas are metallic areas. You might want to use a bit of your gold here, and you might need to go back with your lead belcher and start to tidy up the little areas where some of these bronze and golds have spilled over. But I wouldn't worry about it too much unless it's really obvious, because in later stages they're going to largely be hidden. Because Agrax Earthshade, frankly, is bottled talent. There are very, very few models or colours that are not improved by just giving them a wash of Agrax Earthshade. This is particularly true for military colours, browns and greens, but also skeletons. Frankly, almost all of my models have been washed in Agrax. Sometimes I then go over and paint a lot of it back just to bring the brightness back up and leave it just in the recesses. But with these models, you want to do this quite extensively. It is a wash. You want to use a fairly big brush because you want to get a lot of that wash in it, and you want to just splat that stuff on and then move it around a little bit. Try and get it on the whole model in one go, and try not to have the brush wants to be soaked, but it doesn't want to be dripping. What I tend to do, as you can see in the still, is I'll use the inside of the cap, which has got that little lip on. So I'll jab the brush into the pot, and then I'll just wipe it a little bit on there. You can in fact see from the lids of the paint pots around it in that tin where it's flecked a little bit as I've brushed it off. There's actually a reason I do it like that, and I do it in that tin, because I've knocked over several pots of Agrax Earthshade, and you can get little tools on your desk to kind of plop it in, but I find that if it's just in a crammed tin of paint, that is enough to stop it falling over or me knocking it over by accident. But watch out for that, because it's a big pot and it's very light, and it will go spill everywhere if you knock it over. So when we look at the models, and you can see once you've got the Agrax Earthshade, it's done two things. It's put a darker edge around all of the recesses and really helped some of those details stand out. It's really dulled down all of the colours, and it's given a consistent tone across the whole model. Now, definitely from a professional painting perspective, there's a lot more to do here. That's really the starting point of painting. You should go back to the reds, and you should use maybe a Mephiston red or a lighter red, and you should highlight that up. And with those fabrics, it works quite well, actually. You can bring out quite a good detail on that, and it's a good place to practice. You should go back to the metals with a lighter one and give an edge to one side, and maybe a really, really bright one to make it look like you've got some scuff marks on there. And there are other people who've made plenty of videos like this, but we're talking about tabletop ready painting, and I'm going to tell you that this model is ready for the table. And those were the paints used. There's quite a lot of paints there, I won't deny it, but you have to remember that many of those paints, certainly the second half of those paints, they're all about the details. And you can use more, and you can use less, and you can use different. I hope you found this video useful. I hope this is going to help you paint your skeletons, and I actually do believe that if you're a beginning painter, get yourself a box of skeletons. Thank you for watching!